Same old game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for December 21st, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. I am not lying when I tell you that this is going to be a lion-filled episode.
Quite literally, just looking on camera here, you're wearing the pun already.
Got my Lions. I got my Lions t-shirt on for those that are just listening to this via Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I got my Lions on. Brendan is a literal Nittany Lion.
That's true. That's true.
And representing his Nittany Lions, who are playing right now as we are recording this. So it's incredible that I could even get Brendan from the couch.
We were talking offline about this. We have a clear line of sight to the Final Four. I am not interested in this SMU game as much.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. All of that to say, we have a lot of lions going on in our lives, including one Mufasa as well. So
the king of all lions.
The king of all lions. I heard Mufasa is going to be at the Lions game this weekend in Detroit. That's what I heard.
Why would that not surprise me?
Yeah, I think that would be great if we could get Mufasa. Maybe get him on the field. Does he play defense? Because
I was going to say
the Lions need defense.
I was going to say, given the protective instincts that we see from Mufasa in this movie, you might want him on your defense.
I think so. I think so. I think we can find a spot for him. I think we can. I think he'll fit in just nicely.
It's Mufasa. Yeah. I'll let him on.
Exactly. He'll immediately become captain.
His reputation precedes himself.
Oh, it's absolutely incredible. So we are obviously here to talk about Mufasa, the Lion King, a prequel to the 2019 Lion King, directed by Barry Jenkins, who was the one who pitched this, I believe, to Disney, if I remember correctly. Like, this is something he's been wanting to do.
Yeah, and I think it also came up because of Jeff Nathanson's script that also surprised him as well. There was a lot of back and forth there, from what I understand, but I don't know the full story.
Yeah, I don't know the full story. Perhaps he was drawn to Nathanson's script. Maybe he wanted a little bit of a payday so he can go and make his next Moonlight.
That. Yeah, we'll talk about that.
That could be part of it as well. You know, you got to make money, right? You got to get your money, and I do not blame Barry Jenkins or anyone for getting their money. But that could certainly be part of it as well. I also know, and we're not going to get into this too much, but I've already seen some discourse on this, particularly on Facebook. I do know that this film completely disrupts previous Lion King lore as established on what the TV show. I can't really recall the name of it, but
is that really canon?
I don't know. I don't know what's canon and what isn't in the Lion King, if I'm being perfectly honest. But look, but if you adhere to said canon, maybe this film will rub you the wrong way. That's certainly possible. Who knows?
Maybe
that's what Nathanson was doing the whole time. Maybe he didn't like the TV show. It's like, I can do it better.
This whole movie is a course correction from that TV show.
Course
now everything makes sense.
Exactly. All right. I guess we can set the table here a little bit. Let's briefly talk about The Lion King. So there are obviously two versions of The Lion King. There's the 1994 animated film and the 2019 live action.
I thought remake. What you were about to say was this. There's the 1994 animated film, and then there's the 2019 animated film.
Exactly. That's more or less where we're at. And look, that 1994 Lion King, I am on the record. I know it's a bit of a simple vanilla take, but I do think it is genuinely one of the best animated films of all time. Certainly hovering in that top 3 for me, and probably a top of my Disney list. I think it is absolutely phenomenal stuff. I think its reputation, this is one of those times, and I know we've mentioned this before, because the discourse can get really, really tired, especially when it comes to things that are popular and those wanting to take down the mantle, so to speak. I think this is one of those instances where its reputation is wholly earned, and one of the keystones of the Disney Renaissance for sure.
At worst, it is a top 10 Walt Disney animated film. I think.
Sure.
I think. Yeah, and that's there are some from the Renaissance era I do slightly prefer, like Beauty and the Beast, but that's just one I think I saw first, so I've always had more of an attachment to that one.
Another masterpiece. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is something about The Lion King that was also this weird kind of turning point, even within the Disney Renaissance, because it had this. It was shifting talented gears, right? Looking more towards people like Elton John to do the music, as opposed to Alan Menken, who was very notorious for working with Disney at that time. So it had a very different energy. It felt more cinematic by comparison. It was certainly the biggest Disney animated film of that time, not just monetarily, but also in size and scope. It truly is an epic film.
Absolutely. An epic for sure, a tragedy that has bold ambition. Like, it really harkens back to that old school Disney, we're going to take you as close to the line as possible.
Oh yeah.
And I love that.
It's Hamlet. It's
Hamlet.
It's the Bible.
And it doesn't hold back its punches, which is what's so great about that animated film. Like, it really leans into the tragedy in some phenomenal ways, which as time goes on, I just feel like we have to appreciate more and more, because this iteration of Disney, the Disney of 2024, would never make that movie, ever.
Well, I mean, they technically kind of did, and yet somehow it had all of the edges in the soul completely shaved off.
Well, and that leads us to 2019's version, which, and look, I think the 2019 film, it obviously happens because there's precedent. They did make the 1994 film, and I think because of what it is, they had no problem regurgitating it. But I think if you're making something from scratch, and I think this is indicative of what we've seen with Disney animation, although there's been some good films, do not get me wrong, but despite how good some of their movies have been over the last decade, not many of them have been nearly as bold. I agree. The only thing that you can attribute to that kind of quality, again, is probably the 2019 Lion King, but for the reasons you just stated, it certainly does not resonate.
It doesn't resonate, but it also doesn't earn those praises because it's doing something that a previous film had already done.
Exactly.
So
it is shot for shot.
It doesn't earn that credit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I completely agree. The animation, as, I don't know, striking as it may be in terms of the photorealism of it, that is one of its biggest downgrades, is the photorealism of it.
It does work against itself, which is weird. I mean, because it is, on its face, a beautifully animated film. And when we saw that film and reviewed it back in 2019, you and I mostly called it an experiment. It really felt like an experiment of what Disney can do with their animation and with their rendering of that animation, and how precise and real it can ultimately look. The whole film felt like it was almost like a trial run of that animation style. And but in doing so, it's not a movie. Like, it doesn't feel like a movie. So if anything, I think you called it a nature documentary in a lot of ways.
That's what it
feels
is.
more like that. Honestly, I think it would have been more successful had it just been completely stripped of its Lion King roots and just played like an animated nature documentary. I think it would have been more interesting.
I agree. I think that's probably the route you're going to take if you're going to utilize that style of animation. However, they decided not to do that. They made whatever they made, and
they made a lot of money. They made a lot of money,
but artistically extremely bankrupt, and fundamentally just the wrong approach, I think. So not very good.
Agreed.
And look, we have to lay the groundwork there, because at least for me, I assume to at least some degree for you as well, how we feel about those two movies is certainly going to play a significant part as to my reaction to Mufasa. So,
yeah, maybe.
With that said, let's go ahead and jump into this. Mufasa is directed by Barry Jenkins. It stars Aaron Pierre, Kelvin Harrison Jr., Seth Rogen, Billy Eichner, Tiffany Boone, Donald Glover, Mads Mikkelsen, Thandie Newton, and the list goes on and on and on. Of course, Beyonce has a smaller role once again here as well. Small, very, very small.
Oh, yeah. She has maybe 2 lines in the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
She probably recorded them in her house.
Yeah. This is about, you guessed it, Mufasa. A cub lost and alone meets a sympathetic lion named Taka, the heir to a royal bloodline. The chance meeting sets in motion an expansive journey of a group of misfits searching for their destiny. All right, let's jump into this. Brendan, what did you think of Mufasa?
Well, I'm glad Barry Jenkins got paid. I am so...
Okay, that's it. We're done here, right? Yeah, let's go home. Let's wrap
because
it up.
I cannot wait to see what his next masterpiece is going to be. Although, I don't know, given the early numbers from its opening weekend with this movie, it's not tracking as high as I think it was expected. So we may have more to talk about that when we get to the main show and the box office results, especially when compared to Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which it's competing against. But with regard to Mufasa, it's pretty interesting because we often talk about this a lot, JD, with regard to Disney essentially acquiring high-end new filmmakers for what are essentially just cash grabs. But that narrative has never been stronger than it was for Barry Jenkins directing Mufasa. I feel like that conversation has been the loudest with regard to that topic. And there have been cases where we have sensed that director making his or her own unique stamp on whatever property they were doing, such as Chloe Zhao's Eternals. I'm going to Marvel, for instance. That feels very much, in most cases, like a Chloe Zhao movie. I sadly don't think this feels fully like a Barry Jenkins movie. Although I do definitely sense some of his touches. I think the mood and the overall tonality does suggest some of the things that we've seen in movies like Moonlight, but especially If Beale Street Could Talk. The way that his cinematographer, James Laxon, chooses to move the camera, there's a swaying motion to it, a few close-up shots of these lions' faces that are kind of eerily reminiscent of his own Jonathan Demme influence, right? So I could definitely sense a little bit of that there, but there is this like emotional intimacy kind of buried underneath that first Lion King. When I say first, I mean the 2019 version that this is a prequel to. It certainly has that first one did not have at all. So automatically that makes it better than the 2019 film. And it was always going to be better because it has the edge by not being a shot-for-shot remake. It didn't matter what this product was going to be. It's its own story. And that's automatically going to make it a better movie. And I think overall, just given some of those Barry Jenkins touches, I think it is one of the better live, quote unquote, live action remakes that we've gotten from the Disney canon, which means it's okay. I thought it was okay. It's about the best I can say for it, but I do think it has some hidden flourishes that are pretty interesting. I just think it's kind of neat that, maybe not neat, but I feel like it also, the existence of this movie is going to raise a pretty interesting conversation about what it means for directors like a Barry Jenkins to take on material like this. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is it okay that he's simply accepting a paycheck to fund the next masterpiece that he's going to make? Or is that a problem that now he has this weird detour in his filmography, right? And I think there is an argument to be had on both sides of that. And I think this movie, that conversation is going to be louder than it ever was, just given how well-regarded Barry Jenkins is. And I do find that kind of interesting. So I'm curious to see where that conversation goes. Selfishly, I just wish I saw more of him in it. But I do think there are some pretty decent things going on that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we were ever going to see Barry Jenkins in this film. Not fully anyway, but I don't even know if I expected half of Barry Jenkins to show up here. And I think expectations is the foundation for how I come into this.
Okay.
Because one, as I noted, the animated The Lion King is one of the very best animated films of all time. To say that it emotionally slayed me, even as a child, but even more so today, I can barely begin to articulate it. I've certainly tried over the years We gave it a full review here on the show some years ago. It's come up several different times in the past. I absolutely adore it. I think it is one of the best anime films ever made. Mm-hmm. The 2019 Lion King, for all the reasons we noted earlier, is abysmal. Absolutely abysmal.
Is that your least favorite of these live action remakes we've gotten from Disney?
It's not even close.
Okay, because I'm with you in that.
It's not even close. Not even close. It is a shot-for-shot remake. It is fundamentally flawed, as we noted earlier. The photorealism is great, but obviously a detriment to that film. I think it is really, really bad. Like, you called it soulless. That is perfectly apt. It is a soulless movie, creatively bankrupt.
Yeah.
Do not like it at all. So, the bar for me is beneath the earth. It is 17 feet beneath the earth. The bar could not be any lower. So, with that in mind, I dug this film.
All this movie had to be was, I think it's better than this, but all it had to be was pretty bad and it would be good. Right?
Yeah. Look, I don't think the film is great by any stretch of the imagination, but I also don't think it is abysmal either. I think it is perfectly adequate for what it is. It is predictably nostalgic. The story, while acting as something new to the lore and to the story of The Lion King. However, it is very tropey. There's nothing here narratively that is going to surprise you.
I mean, we've seen this earlier this year. It's Transformers 1 all over again.
It's Transformers 1 all over again. Absolutely. And Transformers 1, I do think, handles that with much more nuance and grace.
Oh, I agree.
But I don't think that it is unwatchable. I think they're still fun to be had. I don't love the musical numbers here. I think they're very forgettable.
I agree. And it's interesting that Lin-Manuel Miranda chose not to do Moana 2 because he was focusing on this. And
I know.
These songs feel rushed. They
do not.
Lin-Manuel Miranda is someone I mostly like. I don't always love his stuff. I think he can sometimes be a little hit or miss. But when he hits hard, right? I think, how many numbers were here? Maybe 5 musical numbers? I think if that's the case, I think this might be his 5 worst songs, honestly. I think that argument could be had.
Certainly could be. I mean, I really like Lin-Manuel Miranda. I know that because he was everywhere, people started to get tired of him. I think he's really great, though, when he's able to really put his heart into it. And that is the case with Moana. Moana is another one of those examples where I think it has its issues. I think narratively it's a little contrived at times, but man, the music makes up for it all. The music saves that film, like really lifts it up.
There are
to
a lot of bangers in that. And of course, we're talking about Moana. We're not talking about Moana 2. We're talking about Moana.
The first Moana. Yeah. The first, he didn't really have anything to do with Moana 2, as you noted.
Exactly.
So yeah, that first Moana is really great. Obviously, what he's done on the stage has been fantastic as well. And I don't know if you saw, like, he did an interview, I think with Jimmy Fallon. I can't recall who it was. But anyway, he was talking about how The Lion King, the soundtrack, is on this pedestal, right? Because there's only 5 numbers in that film, but every single one of them are like infiltrated the zeitgeist. We all know them.
They are part of the 90s culture. It's like they're even some of Elton John's best songs. Like they cross over between different, I guess, like categories, right? It's all over the place.
Yeah. And the way Lin-Manuel articulated it, he said, is that soundtrack is unskippable. You don't skip a song because they're all bangers. So I was curious what that meant, because that was, like, he went on to talk about how that was his aim here. And I hate to report, I think they're all skippable. Like, this is a completely skippable soundtrack. It's not great.
You, sadly. Yeah.
However, the reason I ended up enjoying this, and this is where Barry Jenkins is simply smart as a filmmaker, for me anyway, and perhaps for many others as well, is one, he keeps this script fairly tight. Everything is fairly straightforward. It's quite easily attainable. And again, predictably nostalgic. And what I love that he does here is that he uses Hans Zimmer as a cheat code.
Oh,
he uses Hans
that
Zimmer
one theme, that
as
one
a
theme
freaking
that
cheat code.
it comes up. You can make a drinking game out of it for how many
It
times
comes up a lot.
Up. Yeah,
it comes up, and that's what I mean. Like, did he overutilize that Mufasa theme here? Maybe, but Hans Zimmer's score for that Lion King, which he won an Oscar for, rightfully so, to not lean on that, I think, would be perhaps an obtuse decision to make as an artist. Is it maybe a little cheap? You could even call it lazy. I don't care. I think it was smart of him to be brazen by leaning on Zimmer with the cheat code. And I've talked about this with Hans Zimmer before, generally, is that he creates these themes that are so good that he'll use them in other films. And I'm perfectly okay with that. I love that Hans Zimmer does that.
Yeah.
This little cue from Gladiator is so good, I'm going to turn it into an entire franchise. And yes, it goes hard. It goes super hard.
Y'all love that main theme from the end of Inception. I'm going to use that in another Best Picture winner in 12 Years a Slave.
Exactly. Totally love that about him. I am okay with that. And that's essentially what Barry Jenkins is doing here. Yeah, that Lion King cue, that Mufasa cue is so good. Why would I not use that? Of course I'm going to regurgitate that. And inherently, this story is built with emotion, right? Because it is about Mufasa becoming an orphan. That in and of itself has tragedy. He befriends this other lion cub who grow up as brothers, and they're very close. And then ultimately there is the downfall of that relationship. So there is an inherent emotion built up into that. Why not heighten that with a cue that we already know and love to emphasize the emotional journey for Mufasa here that is inexplicably, not inexplicably, but intimately rather connected to that character. And that's what I love so much about Mufasa in that original Lion King. He's such a great character. I deeply love his presence in that film, and the way it utilizes his death and tragedy for Simba is so emotionally overwhelming for me that I could not help it when Barry Jenkins brought that back here as perhaps as vanilla and flaccid as the broad narrative might be. There's something about the performances coupled with that cue. I could not separate. I could not separate the original Mufasa. I could not separate the cue from Hans Zimmer. So it won me over. It won me over. Like the brazenness of the filmmaking won me over.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because I think you can also look at that interpretation in a more cynical way as well. You know, like the fact that Barry Jenkins chooses to keep integrating that classic Mufasa theme into this movie almost turns this entire experiment into a commentary on the idea of Disney's idea of regurgitation, right? It's almost like Barry Jenkins' way of saying, I know I cannot make my own movie out of this, so I'm just going to give you exactly what Disney is asking for. I'm not even going to try, and I'm not even going to hide it.
And that's it. Yeah,
so
and that's why, to your point earlier, you don't really see much of him here because he is pandering to the Disney overlords. Because this is probably what they would have wanted out of this.
Yeah, and there is maybe something in the messaging that is suggesting that pandering. It's almost like maybe there's a little bit of that Dumbo effect happening here where Tim Burton basically made a movie that cryptically says Disney sucks. And maybe there is a little bit of that happening here.
Perhaps.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe we're overthinking it, but I do think there are some things in the filmmaking here. This movie certainly feels more directed than the 2019 Lion King. It feels more like a filmmaker is trying to put some type of stamp on it. Whether it's his or her own stamp is maybe a different question. And I can understand why that would be frustrating for some people when a talent like Barry Jenkins is ultimately still being, kind of held in a cage, right? And not able to make his own movie. And I understand how frustrating that is, but he clearly knows that he's not able to make his own movie. And he's even commented on that. I forget what interview he did or where it's officially published, what source published it, but I think he even openly stated that this particular medium, or I guess more so this particular sandbox, is not something he plans on doing again anytime soon. You could certainly sense that. So perhaps this movie does have that kind of cynical eye to it, that if Barry Jenkins is imbuing this film very deliberately with that cynicism, I kind of appreciate that. I kind of do. Even so, I mentioned in my opening thoughts, there are elements of the filmmaking here where I could sense some of the things that he's known for, whether it be the close-up shots on characters' eyes, in this case, animated lions' eyes. He's at least trying to do that. And like I said, the way the camera moves does feel very reminiscent of the way James Laxton moved the camera in If Beale Street Could Talk, especially. So I definitely got some of those sensibilities as well. And like I said, the overall mood has a bit of a Jenkins-like quality to it. There are a few sequences when Mufasa is tapping into his quote-unquote inner abilities, his sensing, right? The way that the wind carries sound that feel very ethereal in a Barry Jenkins-like way. So I could definitely sense some of those things, which is more than I can say about most of these Disney live-action remakes. That alone makes it, like, out of the 20 or so that they've done of these, this is probably top 5. Right?
Oh, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
It's not Pete's Dragon. It's not Cinderella. I think those are still the 2 best that they've done. If you even want to count Pete's Dragon, that barely even counts in a way. But this is certainly one of the better ones, because at least it has sort of an ethereal artistry to it that most of these just don't have at all.
And I do think it has an emotional underbelly, even if
there is an emotional core to it. Yeah.
Even if it's a bit of a cheat code, I do love it. I mean, for older audiences anyway, obviously younger audiences will not have the same relatability, but, and maybe slight spoilers, I guess, maybe, I don't know. The opening title card is a tribute to James Earl Jones. So immediately
the actual title doesn't drop until like 10 minutes in, which is kind of old for a kid's film, honestly.
Yeah. So, you get the tribute to James Earl Jones, and there is an emotionality to that, of course. And then as the film goes and we start to see Mufasa become orphaned, and as we noted earlier, he's everything that he experiences here, he's like a fish out of water. And he's trying to figure out who he's supposed to be. And the journey of that, I do think there's enough twists and turns, despite the overall predictability of the story here. I think there's enough twists and turns that I was still engaged with it, especially from Mufasa's perspective. I do like how he tries to help Taka, despite Taka clearly cowering in his own fear. He stumbling through a lot of this, but Mufasa is there to pick him up, and he does have this selfless quality that we would expect, given who Mufasa has been depicted to be in those previous movies. And while the Hans Zimmer cheat code is certainly a huge part of what I loved about the film and the character here, I do think, though, that Aaron Pierre is having a great year, and I think he brings something to this character that I also deeply appreciated. I do agree. Elevating that wisdom that often comes with Mufasa, even though he's, for the bulk of this film, in those teenage years, right? Where he's got half the mane. So he's, having to mature beyond his years because of being orphaned and being a part of this other pride that doesn't really want much to do with him outside of the female lions there.
Yeah.
But once it's just him and Taka, like he has no choice but to mature and to really tap into that wisdom. And then, once the Sarabi, think of the character's name there for a second. When Sarabi becomes a part of the fold as well, like the way he interacts with her, like that dynamic, I think is really phenomenal as well. And there are a few specific moments where I'm like, oh my God, like that is wholeheartedly the Mufasa that we know in that original Lion King. And
there
Aaron
is
Pierre,
there is a slow transition to reveal the
yes,
Mufasa that we can recognize, and I think Aaron Pierre does a
yes,
great job with that transformation.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Like he's really good here as well.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like on the whole, I don't think the film is great. It certainly doesn't, expound beyond the formula of Hollywood, especially Disney these days. But
Yeah.
when it's working within the confines of what was set within that sandbox that you mentioned earlier, I do think Barry Jenkins is doing enough here to compel, and leaning on what works, which is the performances, it's the score, and also, and I believe you noted this earlier as well, the animation here, it is a wonderful departure from the 2019 film. Like the photorealism is obviously the foundational base for it all, but the way the eyes work and the expressions on these characters, it's much less rigid. There is more movement there.
It is. And in a way, I think the animation in this film is actually not as good as the 2019 version, but that actually makes it better, right?
Exactly.
Like,
100%.
It doesn't quite have the same three-dimensional realism that 2019 film had. But then again, I think this does still have that Disney desaturated sheen to it that I wish it didn't have. I do wish that maybe there was still a little bit more color to emphasize that three-dimensionality to it. But the animals themselves do express more this time around, which does make them look more literally animated. And Barry Jenkins has said this is an animated film. And I'm glad he's, going right into that. And he's not hiding it at all. So I do appreciate that brazen quality as well. And he being Barry Jenkins, does focus more on the drama than really anything else in many ways. A lot of that is also Aaron Pierre's performance. I do agree with you. His slow and gradual transition to reveal the Mufasa that we recognize, I do think is very good. Certainly better than Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s vocal performance as Taka, which I think is a bit more sudden, a bit too rushed, but I think that's more so the film's fault and not his fault. But I think Aaron Pierre does have the room to play with that, to reveal that gradual transition more effortlessly. And I do like that Barry Jenkins is choosing to focus on that drama, even if that drama itself is kind of tropey. As you said, it's nothing new. We saw earlier this year in Transformers 1. It's there. We've seen this many times. But by focusing on the drama, he's at least trying to find some type of emotional core to it, which is why when I saw this in the theater, I saw it with a bunch of kids. There was a huge audience of children in the movie.
Of course, yeah.
None of them were engaged by this movie. Absolutely none of them were. But then again, it's most likely not going to be representative of every child who sees this movie. And it also could just come with the circumstances that I saw this at a 9:50 a.m. screening. So
that could be part of it.
That could very much be part of it. Children are arguably not in the right kind of cinematic headspace that early in the morning. They have a lot of energy they need to burn off. That putting them in a dark room in a comfortable chair is not the place that they're going to be comfortable. But needless to say, they were not with it. They were not with this thing at all.
Yeah, and I guess to your point, as far as the volatility of that goes, I also saw this in a packed house, and my crowd was wholeheartedly engaged. There was clapping, cheering, and it even had a standing ovation at the end. So my crowd was wholly with it, totally with it the entire time.
That's a good juxtaposition there. I like hearing that. So that it is definitely representative of my situation of the theater I saw it in. But it does, in a way, kind of prove my point that if you're a child getting up that early to see a movie, you're not going to want to put your mind and effort into something like this. I think this does have more of an artfulness than, let's say, a Moana 2, right?
Sure.
It doesn't quite have that same level of attention. It's a very different type of vibe that it's going for, which I do respect out of it. Even if I don't think the movie is ultimately all that great, I at least appreciate that there is more of an artfulness here that we haven't really seen from these live action remakes from Disney, probably since something like Pete's Dragon, or maybe to some extent Peter Pan and Wendy, also by David Lowery. It's very few and far between within that catalog.
And to your point there, and I do agree that there is an artful quality here comparatively, and there is an emphasis on the drama. I don't know if this was the original intent or if screen testing prompted this decision. But I do think that is why we often cut to Timon and Pumbaa.
Oh, I have thoughts.
I think that is.
Oh my gosh.
And I do like. Look, I didn't necessarily love those characters in the 2019 version. I don't really love them here. I think it disrupts a lot of the momentum this film does build dramatically and emotionally. But given that this is obviously wanting to pander to a younger audience and they want kids to go and see this, almost exclusively, not entirely, but almost, of the humor that kids will relate to come from those two characters. And when you're emphasizing the drama and the emotion of this film so brazenly as this film is doing, I can see why the suits would look at Barry Jenkins and go, look, this wasn't maybe the original intent, but we need more of those characters.
Oh my gosh. I think the intercutting, really the whole framing device specifically, is probably the most egregiously awful thing I've seen all year. I think it's and I say that ironically too, because back when we talked about the 2019 Lion King, the thing I had the most praise for was Timon and Pumbaa. Seth Rogen and Billy Eichner, because at least by comparison to that film's, shot for shot mentality, at least those two actors were at least perceivably trying to add a new energy to that story, something that wasn't already done. But I think with this movie, with Mufasa, for me, the problem is not really the Timon and Pumbaa of it all. It's really just the narrative framework and the constant intercutting. It's really more of a pacing thing. And the story that Rafiki is telling Kiara here is there's a lot of story. It really is quite a bit. Like if you just made a 2-hour movie out of just the story that Rafiki is telling Kiara, that's already not enough time. We spend literally 30 seconds of Mufasa and Taka first meeting each other, and 30 seconds later, oh, you're my brother, I love you. It's like there's no sense of proper pacing to that, and I think the movie ultimately suffers from that. And I think a lot of that intercutting just makes it even worse. When I think that even despite the tropiness of the drama, there could have been a well-earned emotional core had the film just taken its time where it needed to. I just don't think it does rightfully.
Well, and again, I think that's where you have to look at the demographics of this film and where are they going to engage with it. And I do think it becomes a mathematical equation at that point instead of an artistic
it does. You're right.
Process. And that is unfortunate. I do agree with that criticism. I don't think that wholly works here. But to an extent, I understand it. I do understand why they made those choices, because that is ultimately where the humor comes from that will engage a younger audience for sure. Because there is an emphasis on that drama. And I do selfishly wish that they focused more on that Taka-Mufasa relationship when they're kids and they rush that a little bit. I'm okay with that choice. Where I think they really needed to perhaps slow things down and develop that further was on their journey when they're, again, in these teenage years. And this is where Taka, spoiler alert, I guess, eventually becomes who we know as Scar. And this is something Transformers 1 does very, very well. Like, really get into the emotional underbelly of why Taka becomes the way he does. And while it's fundamentally easy to see where that that kind of rage and indignancy comes from, but I think what's there is compelling, right? Because Mufasa goes out of his way to help Taka. He is actively lying to Sarabi, and at times it's he does everything he can to kind of get away from the truth as it relates to her and how he feels about her, which is why Taka eventually becomes indignant when, as we all know, they end up getting together. They're together in the light.
We know that. Yeah, you're right.
We know that. So we know it's going to end there. But I do think that shift is sudden, as you noted earlier. And I don't know if the film has enough time to really to unravel those emotions in a nuanced way to, to your point, to kind of really earn that emotional payoff that we get. Because we are often, undercutting the narrative here by going back to the framing device. I like, again, it's a little unfortunate. I still think where it ultimately still works for me is in the performances, and again, leaning on that Hans Zimmer score. I think it's really great. And I think a lot of the action of the final act,
it's pretty fun.
It's fun. It's diverting.
It's certainly more well choreographed than many of these other live action remakes we've gotten.
I agree.
Thus far. Yeah,
I agree. And I kind of love. Sorry, last thought.
No, you're good.
I do kind of love how they don't overextend that final fight there between Mufasa and Kyros. It's there's a little bit of a fight. There's some back and forth once he falls into a cave, and then you kind of get into the end of it. It doesn't overstay its welcome, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I do love that Barry Jenkins isn't interested in melodrama.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I do think it is perhaps very unfortunate given how the pacing really stifles the turning point between Taka and Mufasa in that back half. And I don't think this was the intent, but given that kind of rushed storytelling choice there and the framing device and how it intercuts, it simply kind of comes off that their falling out really happened because of a woman. It almost makes it seem very love triangle-y, and I don't think that was the intent. That feels kind of like an unwanted accident, given the circumstances of how this movie is structured and how it's paced and how Barry Jenkins just couldn't get around that, because I do think there are more deep-rooted issues happening between Taka and Mufasa that the film is trying to focus on, but it does feel very love triangle-y on the surface that I did find frustrating, especially given how there actually is a lot of nuance between the two of them in that first half that maybe we could talk about further that I did kind of appreciate. I just think on the surface, it kind of misses some of that given the pacing of all of that.
Well, I think what's interesting is that the screenplay is actively fighting against that. As I noted, Mufasa isn't interested in creating some sort of drama between the three of them. Right. Where he is actively lying to Sarabi. Now, eventually she catches wind of it, maybe pun intended.
Yeah.
And is able to see the scheming going on there. But he gets out of the way. He gets out of the way, realizes that Taka wants to confront Sarabi, and he helps him in that process. So the film is aware of that. It is kind of actively reverting against it. It's once Taka becomes indignant and then he channels that rage, that's kind of where it sort of leans into that romantic triangle thing. Yeah. And maybe where that could have worked is, okay, so the turn is maybe a little sudden, but as soon as we get the turn, what happens? We get a musical number from Taka, which again, very forgettable. If that is a really good musical number that really digs into why he's feeling that way and that emotion is felt because of the music there, which is the intended consequence there, right? That's what they're trying to do. But the music is so mundane that the emotion evaporates.
Which is not what happened in the original Lion King from 1994.
No.
Whether the musical numbers serve the plot or not, they serve the characters' turning points, right? So like they actually filled in the gaps that maybe a script wasn't able to do in in sensing where a character was going emotionally. That's what the purpose of a
great example. A great example is "Can You Feel the Love Tonight?" Right? Sure. Because Simba, and forgive me, I can't recall the character's name off the cuff here. Yeah. Because they kind of meet up. It's the first time.
Sorry, Nala.
Yeah, Nala. Yeah. It's the first time they've seen each other. No, it's fine. I forgot too. They haven't seen each other in years, obviously. They meet. And then, of course, there's going to be an initial embrace of, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in a long time. We were childhood sweethearts kind of thing. And so there's, of course, going to be a bit of a reunion there. Yeah. But in the immediate aftermath, that's when you get that musical number that really enhances that romanticism between the two. And the lyrics there and how it taps into it's so good. It's really like it really takes that initial emotional reconnection and takes it to a whole new stratosphere that you just buy that they connect that deeply that quickly.
I just think it's so funny how when they recreated that for The Lion King 2019, it took place in the daylight.
Well, what are you gonna do?
I mean, that movie's already full of miscalculations, but that's weirdly one of the biggest ones. But yeah, I do agree. Like, that's a great example that, fills in the thematic and emotional space that maybe the narrative isn't required to give us. And here with Mufasa, the musical numbers do absolutely nothing to whether to serving the emotional core or the narrative. They do absolutely nothing. And that's very unfortunate because I do think there was room for them to really tie things together and add to that emotional core. Otherwise, there are a lot of gaps missing here, unfortunately.
I agree. You wanted to note the Mufasa-Taka relationship in the first half?
Well, yeah, because I actually thought the first half was a bit stronger than the second half, given the dynamic between Mufasa and Taka and how that related to Taka's own bloodline. There are a lot of questions that I feel like the film, or maybe even Barry Jenkins as an artful filmmaker, is asking about whether Mufasa's integration within this royal family as an adopted brother brings about major consequences and whether it's even his fault. Like the idea of Mufasa simply being there kind of weirdly opens up some of these existing wounds between Taka and his own father, Obasi. I believe that was his name. The fact that Mufasa, being very protective of his now adopted mother, was he too aggressive with those protective instincts? Did that then lead to some type of conflict, some type of misunderstanding? Also, there's Taka's own cowardice, which mostly stems from him overhearing Mufasa's own desires not to be king in the first place. So there are some nuances here that I do think are pretty complex. And I guess that's why when I called the second half more of a love triangle than anything else, it's more so just the execution, maybe the framing device intercutting those nuances a bit. But I do think there are some significantly interesting ideas in that first half that I wish that maybe was more... it was still more sense throughout the second half, but I think that's more so the corporate film itself being the fault there, and just interrupting that kind of thing.
And that's where I do wish that there was again more time to flesh out and realize Mufasa's choice to take a step back as we get to the middle section there, and he lets Taka pursue Sarabi.
Yeah,
because I think those complexities you're talking about are really interesting. It's really clear early on that Taka, and he does voice this, he doesn't really want the throne. He has no ambition for it whatsoever. Not that Mufasa does either, but there is a clear difference between the two in terms of which one has the better leadership qualities. And Taka's father, I think, recognizes that. I think the film demonstrates that, but it's his son. Of course he wants his son to take the throne there. So like to really flesh out those complexities, I think would have been obviously it becomes a missed opportunity in the end here.
And that's not to say that Mufasa is the one to blame for that, but weirdly his integration and his inclusion in this story kind of opens those discussions very indirectly, which I did find kind of weirdly Princess Mononoke like in a way. Like you have these two factions that have their own points of view that you kind of understand, and Mufasa simply being there kind of creates this unwanted ripple effect. Like I thought that was really intriguing, and that felt like the Barry Jenkins magic at play more so than anything else for me.
I agree. I certainly dug that as well. And I do kind of like that they infuse this story with not just Mufasa's choices as it relates to Taka, but the overarching narrative is that they're trying to get to some sort of green oasis. He's trying to get home.
The green place. Yeah, this is Furiosa all over again.
Exactly. We're trying to get to the green place. And of course Rafiki becomes a big part of that journey as well. And I do like that dynamic at play. So like the fundamental ideas here, I honestly don't have too much of an issue with. I think it simply comes down to execution and again, pandering to the Disney suits who are wanting to pander to children, you know, and it becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle. And that's why, again, going back to the very beginning of this conversation, I don't know how much Barry Jenkins I expected here. I expected a lot of Disney interference, and I think that's ultimately what we get. But I think there's enough of that Barry Jenkins magic. There's enough of how the camera moves, the emphasis on the eyes, and again, just really leaning into Hans Zimmer. Just really brazenly leaning into Hans Zimmer in a way that I appreciate. And honestly, not even just Hans Zimmer, but even some visual cues. There are explicit visual cues here that's obviously working as foreshadowing that he just blatantly rips. That Barry Jenkins.
Oh yeah, he's not trying to hide it, which I do appreciate.
He's not trying to hide it. And look, I don't have an issue with it. Like, fine. I understand what you're trying to do here, and it's, you know.
I can't wait for his next movie, whatever it ends up being.
I agree. It's going to be great. I mean, obviously, he just needed to get a payday, and he
needed to fund it. You know, after the ambition of the Underground Railroad, I don't know what if his next project has a similar level of ambition, but whatever it might end up being, whatever he is trying to churn out next, I fully expect it to be something great. And if this is the thing that funds it, okay. I'm glad it exists for that reason. I'm also weirdly glad it exists as a potential conversation starter about what it means for a great artist to take on a corporate product like this. Because like I said earlier, I feel like that's a conversation we've been having for almost 10 years now as film critics, but it feels even louder than ever before, given the Barry Jenkins of it all. And I think that's really interesting to, you know, have that conversation and see what that means. So we'll see where this goes, but I'm very curious to see what his next project is.
I am curious as well. I'm also, and I don't know if anyone listening to this has the backstory on this, because I do know at one point Nicholas Bertel was set to compose this film.
I was thinking about that. This movie needed a lot of Nicholas Bertel energy.
Yes, I think so as well. And maybe that's ultimately why Barry Jenkins chose to incorporate Hans Zimmer so heavily here, is because he lost his composer. Again, I don't know what the story is there, but he ends up dropping out, and then they have to bring in someone else. And as a result, I think you kind of get like in between the Hans Zimmer, I think it's mostly forgettable.
I agree.
And then you bring in the Hans Zimmer of it all, and man, I think it becomes this really enthralling experience.
It doesn't become memorable, but it becomes there's at least an emotional core that it's, you know, kind of like covering there.
Exactly. You know, and I did respond to it. Again, I cannot separate my love from that 1994 animated film. And so, and Mufasa is such a significant piece of that, right? I mean, I obviously love the Simba of it all and what his journey is, but the way Mufasa is depicted in that film, and even more so now looking through it as an adult and through the lens of being a father, that character, it profoundly moves me. And that moment where Hans Zimmer really goes hard as far as that Mufasa theme goes, with that sequence in the clouds near the end of that film, it is one of the best animated scenes of all time, I think. And to just kind of lean into that ethos here, as I noted earlier, I think it's really great. But I kind of wonder if that is born out of whatever happened with Bertel.
It may have. Yeah, I think it's an interesting
Because if you have a Nicholas Bertel, you're just going to use Bertel, who's equally brilliant.
I mean,
would think.
if Beale Street Could Talk is one of the best musical scores of the past 10 years.
It's really great. So, I don't know. I don't know if anyone has that story, but I
was trying to look it up as you were talking. I was trying to Google Nicholas Bertel and Mufasa to see if there's any story there, and I couldn't find anything. So, yeah, if there is a story there and those listening this far into the conversation know some answers, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that is Mufasa, the Lion King. I'm with you. I'm deeply excited to see what Barry Jenkins does next. Because He's going to be ready. He's going to be ready to bring something fantastic.
Yeah, and to round out this conversation a little bit, something I'm looking at here, I tried doing a letterbox ranking of Disney's quote-unquote live-action remakes, and I mean, most of these are horrible. It's like it's not really worth the exercise, but I mean, yeah, by default, I do think this is one of the better ones. This is certainly top 5, I think. And I think you and I are in agreement. Is it Pete's Dragon and Cinderella for you as the top 2 of these thus far? I know you like the book more than I do, but I didn't know if you had it higher than those other 2.
Honestly, I think the Jungle Book is very akin to this film. Like I feel about them somewhat the same. Like the Jungle Book also has its blemishes, but I think there is an emotional core to that film that honestly might even trump the animated film for me. I like the animated film. I don't love it as much as others do, but I do really like it. But there is something about the emotion of that film, the live action remake, that I kind of responded to more. So despite, where it trips, I think it kind of makes up those gaps in the emotion. So like, I kind of feel about them the same.
Okay.
I was trying to pull them up here as we talk, because I don't have that letterbox in front of me, but
yeah, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, as we weren't really prepared to have this particular conversation here. But I did have it open, so I was just curious.
Just looking at them, like I prefer this over The Little Mermaid.
Same.
Peter Pan and Wendy. As much as I do go to bat for that film,
I think that film is more hit or miss than Mufasa, but I think the hits where that film does hit are stronger than anything in Mufasa.
I agree. Like Pinocchio, flat out garbage.
Nope, bad.
Cruella, I did like Cruella. I
like the first half of Cruella. I think it loses itself in the back half.
Okay, fair. I think on the whole, I still might take that over Mufasa, maybe. And I kind of feel the same about Mulan. Like, I love that Mulan is nothing like its predecessor. It is a wholly different experience. So, like, I do kind of appreciate that one. Lady and the Tramp, I never did see. Like, that is honestly a blind spot for me.
I think it's one of the worst, actually.
Is it?
But I know some people who really liked it. I couldn't get behind the animated dogs. I couldn't get behind it.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of looking at these, like, yeah, I mean, it's Cinderella and it's Pete's Dragon. Like, those are easily the 2 best at this point.
Yeah, because they're the ones that actually feel like legit movies. Which I would also weirdly say about I admittedly have a soft spot for the 1996 version of 101 Dalmatians with Glenn Close.
Oh yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah, that's probably my number 3. But then again, like it's not great, but at least it feels like a movie with its own kind of goal in mind. But then again, it also predates this whole movement. So it's kind of better by default, right?
Yes. Because a lot of these, like, it does feel like at least there was some sort of purpose.
Yeah.
Or like they did a pretty good job with that film. Like,
sure.
A lot of the ones lately, they're just money grabs and really nothing more.
Yeah. Honestly, it was kind of hard to rank these as I look at the list in front of me, because once you get to like Aladdin, Dumbo, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, like they're all like in that same level of just bad for me. Like they
That's
just
fair.
Yeah, they're all in that same kind of.
And Snow White doesn't look a whole lot better. That one looks also terrible.
That looks like it's going to fall into another one of those kind of categories there. Like it's going to be in the same playing field as Aladdin and Dumbo and Little Mermaid, which means it will be not good.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to think of Lilo and Stitch. I mean, we've only had that little teaser, so it's hard to really judge that one as it stands.
The one thing that has me curious about Lilo and Stitch is that it's directed by Dean Fleischer Camp, who did Marcel the Shell with Shoes on.
Yes.
And but then again, we've seen more cases
Mufasa
than
was
not.
directed by Barry Jenkins.
Exactly.
Barry freaking Jenkins.
So does it make sense to get excited about what filmmaker
I don't think that
is
makes
doing
anything.
one of these? I mean, I say that because I kind of like, given the cuteness of Marcel the Shell with Shoes on, I kind of understand why Disney would tap that director for Lilo and Stitch. Like I get the trajectory more so than I get the trajectory of Moonlight to Mufasa, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I bring that up as a as a curiosity more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, we shall see. But I'm not expecting much next year. And even getting into Moana in 2026. I expect Moana to be like The Lion King 2019. I bet you anything that's going to be shot for shot.
It absolutely is. I mean, DreamWorks is doing the same thing now, apparently, with How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah, that's all they do. Now, I'm curious. Like, I do think that'll change. I don't know when it's going to come out, but when that Bambi live action movie comes out, I bet you they're going to remove the best parts of that movie.
Oh my gosh,
they're going to.
They probably
don't have the balls anymore, Brendan. They don't have courage.
The more you talk about it in that way, the more I can't wait till this weekend ends to see how the box office numbers fare for Mufasa, especially compared to Sonic the Hedgehog 3. As much as I didn't care for this movie, I want this one to do well because I want it to send a message that Disney doesn't need to do shot-for-shot remakes anymore. Maybe people want to see new kind of stories within this sort of catalog. But if this movie does not do well, we're going to see a lot more Lion King 2019.
That's a really great point because I also want Mufasa to make $1 billion, but selfishly because I want Barry Jenkins to get as much money as possible.
Yeah, me too. That's another great reason for that.
I want him to bank whatever he can so he doesn't have to come back to this world. But that's also a really great point, though, because if Mufasa the Lion King fails at the box office, we're going to see less of these.
Yeah.
And that is going to be unfortunate.
Yeah. We're especially given the fact that we are getting that live action version of How to Train Your Dragon. Like the forecast is suggesting we're going to be getting more Lion King 2019s. And the success of Mufasa might fast track those even more if it doesn't do well. I'm scared. I am so scared.
Yeah, it is. It's not good.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Not good, Bob. Not good, Bob Iger.
All the while Moana 2 is on its way to $1 billion after completely screwing its animators over. What are you going to do? It's Disney.
Well, and funny enough, Moana 2 is doing well yet when it's technically the exact same movie as Moana 1 in many ways. So I guess in a way it is a remake of its own property. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, we're just kind of rambling on about Disney now, so I guess we'll go ahead and end it there. If you agree or disagree with our takes here on the Lion King, Mufasa the Lion King, rather, you can leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media or email us insessionfilm@gmail.com. All right, we will have another review coming out this week as well. All We Imagine as Light. We have not recorded that review yet. I'm very, very excited for it. I probably wrote more notes for that film than I have any other film this year.
There's a lot to talk about for sure. There's
deeply excited to get into that one. And then episode 516. Is that where we're at now?
616, you mean?
616? Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
616.
Yeah.
I can't keep track of the numbers.
Wow, you were 100 off with that one.
100 off, yeah. 616, rather. Well, I don't know what we're going to talk about. I don't know if we've really decided yet. But it's gonna come out. It's happening.
We'd certainly have a slew of topics here, but I know we definitely want to do another catch-up episode. We might.
Oh yeah, that's what we were gonna do. Yep. I think the next couple of weeks are going to be catch-up episodes. We have a lot of movies to talk about.
Yeah.
So we'll see what the next 2 weeks bring, but I think we're going to be talking. We'll do a couple of catch-up episodes leading into all of the year-end stuff that is happening in January. So
yeah,
look forward to that. The In Session Film Awards nominations are out, at least as those voted on by our staff. So that is available if you want to go and check that out. I really like those nominations. A lot of fun stuff. Chasing the Gold has revealed those. They talked about them a little bit. If you want to hear more on that.
Yeah.
With that, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, Barry Jenkins.
Can you feel the
He's going to come back big. Yeah.